The quiet panic. You guys have been absolutely flooding my comments asking me to cover this topic, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to find enough solid stories about it. But after months of digging through forums, reaching out to contacts, and following some pretty wild leads, I finally managed to piece together 3 absolutely mind-blowing accounts that'll make you question everything you think you know about the entertainment industry. Picture this: you're scrolling through Google Maps, zooming in on your hometown when you notice something weird. There's this massive plot of land that shows up as just green space, but you swear you remember seeing rides and attractions there when you drove past last week. Or maybe you're planning a family vacation and your kid mentions this incredible theme park their friend visited, but when you search for it online, absolutely nothing comes up. No official website, no reviews, no social media presence. It's like the place doesn't exist. Well, here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. These places do exist, and there are way more of them than you'd ever imagine. We're talking about fully operational theme parks that have somehow managed to stay completely off the grid. No GPS coordinates, no government records, no digital footprint whatsoever. And the reasons why they're hidden? That's where things get really disturbing. I've spent the last 6 months investigating this rabbit hole, and what I've uncovered is honestly some of the most unsettling stuff I've ever researched for this channel. We're talking about places that operate under completely different rules, where normal safety regulations don't apply, where the people running these operations have reasons to stay invisible that'll make your skin crawl. But before we dive into these stories, I need you to understand something. The 3 accounts I'm about to share with you come from people who reached out to me directly after seeing my previous videos. These aren't urban legends or creepypasta stories. These are real experiences from real people who stumbled across attractions that officially don't exist. And yeah, I've done my homework. I've verified details, cross-referenced information, and followed up on leads wherever possible. The first story comes from Jake, a 24-year-old who was road tripping across the Midwest with his college buddies last summer. What started as a simple wrong turn ended up changing his entire perspective on what's really happening in those empty spaces between cities that most of us just drive past without thinking twice about. It was the middle of July, brutally hot, and we were driving from Chicago to Denver for my buddy's wedding. We'd been on the road for about 6 hours, and honestly, we were all getting pretty punchy from being cooped up in the car. The GPS kept trying to route us through some construction zone that was adding like 2 hours to our trip. So my friend Marcus, who was navigating, decided to get creative with some back roads. We're talking about the kind of roads where you don't see another car for 30 minutes at a time. Just endless cornfields and the occasional farmhouse. The kind of landscape that makes you feel like you're driving through a movie set. But then we crested this hill, and suddenly there was this massive Ferris wheel just sitting there in the middle of nowhere. At first, none of us said anything. We were all just staring at this thing, trying to process what we were seeing. It wasn't like we spotted some abandoned carnival equipment or old rusted rides. This Ferris wheel was actively spinning with people on it, and we could hear carnival music drifting across the fields even with our windows up. Marcus pulled over to the shoulder and we all got out of the car to get a better look. That's when we realized this wasn't just a Ferris wheel. There was an entire theme park spread out in this valley that we couldn't see from the road. We're talking roller coasters, game booths, food stands, the works, and it was packed with people. The weird thing was we hadn't seen any signs advertising this place. No billboards, no exit markers, nothing. And when I pulled out my phone to see where exactly we were, the GPS showed nothing but farmland. According to my phone, we were standing next to an empty field. We stood there for probably 10 minutes just watching this place operate like any normal amusement park. Kids running around with cotton candy, families waiting in line for rides, teenagers trying to win stuffed animals at ring toss games. It looked completely normal except for the fact that it apparently didn't exist. Finally, Marcus suggested we check it out. I mean, we were ahead of schedule anyway, and none of us had ever seen anything like this before. So we got back in the car and started looking for an entrance. The problem was there didn't seem to be one. We drove around the perimeter of this property for probably 45 minutes, following dirt roads and farm paths, but we couldn't find any kind of main gate or parking area. Every time we thought we'd found a way in, the road would just dead end at a fence or curve back toward the highway. The really unsettling part was that we could still hear the carnival music and see the rides operating, but it felt like we were being deliberately kept out. Like the whole place was designed to be visible but not accessible. Eventually we gave up and got back on the main highway. But here's where it gets really weird. When we looked back from the road trying to get one last glimpse of this mystery park, there was nothing there. Just fields and farmland as far as we could see. We were all pretty shaken up by this point. I mean, 4 people don't just collectively hallucinate an entire theme park. But when we tried to retrace our route later, we couldn't find that hill again. It was like the whole area had just vanished. When we got to Denver, I spent hours on my laptop trying to research what we'd seen. I searched for amusement parks in that area, looked through local news sites, even checked historical records to see if there used to be something there. Nothing. Not a single mention of any kind of entertainment venue anywhere near where we'd been driving. But then I started finding these forum posts from other people describing similar experiences. Always in rural areas, always completely unmarked and impossible to find again. The details were different, but the pattern was the same. Fully operational theme parks that somehow don't officially exist. The second story is even more disturbing, and it comes from Sarah, a 31-year-old real estate agent who discovered something that made her question everything she thought she knew about property records and land ownership. I specialize in commercial real estate, so I spend a lot of time reviewing property surveys and zoning maps. It's pretty boring work most of the time, but it pays well. And I'm good at spotting discrepancies that can affect property values. Last October, I was working on a deal for this huge tract of land outside Phoenix. The client wanted to develop it into a shopping complex, so I needed to do a comprehensive review of everything within a 5-mile radius to assess the market potential. I was cross-referencing satellite imagery with county records when I noticed something that didn't make sense. There was this large developed area that showed up clearly in the aerial photos, but according to every official document I had, that land was classified as undeveloped desert. The satellite images showed what looked like a small amusement park. I could make out roller coaster tracks, a parking area, some kind of entrance plaza. But when I checked the property records, that same area was listed as vacant land owned by a shell company I'd never heard of. At first, I figured it was just outdated paperwork. Maybe the park had been built recently and the county records hadn't been updated yet. But when I dug deeper, I found that this land had been classified as undeveloped for over 20 years. I decided to drive out there and see what was actually going on. If there was an unpermitted development on this scale, it could seriously affect my client's project. The drive took about an hour and a half, mostly through empty desert. When I finally found the right area, I was shocked by what I saw. There was definitely a theme park there, but it wasn't like anything I'd ever encountered before. The whole place had this weird, dated feel to it. The rides looked like they were from the 80s or 90s, but they were in perfect condition. The architecture was all wrong too, like someone had tried to recreate a Disney park from memory but gotten all the proportions slightly off. What really freaked me out was the parking situation. There were maybe 200 cars in the lot, but I hadn't passed a single vehicle on the road leading there. Where had all these people come from? I parked and walked toward the entrance, trying to act casual while I figured out what I was dealing with. The admission booth was staffed by this older woman who smiled at me like she'd been expecting me. She didn't ask for payment or check any kind of ticket, she just waved me through. The inside of the park was even more surreal. Everything was spotlessly clean, but there was something fundamentally wrong about the whole atmosphere. The staff members all wore these identical uniforms that looked like they were from a different decade. And they had this eerie, practiced cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. I watched families enjoying the rides, but something about their behavior seemed off. The kids weren't running around screaming with excitement like you'd expect. Instead, everyone moved with this weird methodical precision like they were following some invisible script. I tried to strike up conversations with other visitors, but nobody wanted to talk. When I asked where they'd heard about this place, people would just smile and walk away. When I asked staff members about operating licenses or safety certifications, they'd give me these blank stares like I was speaking a foreign language. The most disturbing part happened when I tried to leave. I walked back to the parking lot, but my car wasn't where I'd left it. I spent 20 minutes searching before I found it in a completely different section, parked between two vehicles that definitely hadn't been there when I arrived. When I got home, I immediately started researching the shell company that supposedly owned the land. The deeper I dug, the weirder it got. The company had been incorporated in Delaware with an address that turned out to be a mail forwarding service. The listed executives didn't exist in any public records, and the corporate filings contained information that made no legal sense. I ended up dropping the case entirely and referring my client to a different area. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled across something I wasn't supposed to see, and honestly, I didn't want to find out what would happen if I kept digging. The third and final story comes from Mike, a 42-year-old truck driver who's been hauling freight across the country for over 15 years. His experience is probably the most terrifying of all because it reveals just how organized and widespread these hidden operations might actually be. I've driven pretty much every major highway in the continental United States, so I thought I knew all the weird roadside attractions and off-the-beaten-path stops. But last spring, I had a delivery that took me through some backwoods area in Louisiana that I'd never been through before. It was around midnight, and I was looking for a place to pull over and grab some sleep before making my final delivery in the morning. I spotted what looked like a rest area up ahead, but as I got closer, I realized it was actually some kind of amusement park. The whole place was lit up like Christmas, with rides running and music playing, even though it was the middle of the night. I could see people walking around, families with kids, like it was the middle of the afternoon instead of midnight on a Tuesday. I pulled into what I thought was the parking area, figuring I'd ask someone if it was okay to park my rig there overnight. But when I climbed down from my cab, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every single person in that park was wearing the exact same wristband, bright orange plastic bands that seemed to glow under the park lights. And when I looked closer, I realized the wristbands had numbers printed on them instead of names or admission prices. I approached this family that was walking past my truck, planning to ask about parking. But when the father saw me, his expression completely changed. He grabbed his wife and kids and hustled them away from me like I was carrying some kind of disease. That's when I noticed that everyone was staring at me. Not curious stares, but this intense, focused attention that made me feel like I was some kind of threat. I started backing toward my truck, but then I heard footsteps approaching from behind. It was 3 guys in matching uniforms, the same weird retro style that Sarah had described. They weren't aggressive, but there was something about their body language that made it clear I needed to leave immediately. One of them asked to see my manifest, which was weird because park security has no authority to inspect commercial shipping documents. When I told them I was just looking for a place to park overnight, they exchanged these looks that I didn't like at all. They escorted me back to my truck and watched while I fired up the engine and pulled out of their lot. In my side mirror, I could see them talking into radios as I drove away. Here's the really disturbing part. Over the next few weeks, I started asking other drivers if they'd ever seen anything like what I'd encountered. Turns out there are stories like this all over the trucking community. Drivers stumbling across these unmarked attractions in the middle of nowhere, always at night, always with that same weird atmosphere. But here's what really freaks me out. Every driver who's had an experience like this reports the same thing afterward. Their GPS units start malfunctioning in certain areas. They get rerouted away from roads they've driven for years. It's like someone is actively working to make sure we don't accidentally find these places again. So there you have it. 3 separate accounts of theme parks that exist in some kind of legal and digital void. Places that operate with complete impunity. serving customers who seem to know exactly where to find them while remaining completely invisible to the rest of us. The question that keeps me up at night is this: who's running these operations, and why do they need to stay hidden? What kind of activities require this level of secrecy and coordination? And most importantly, how many more of these places are out there, operating just beyond the edge of our awareness? I've been researching this topic for months now, and the more I learn, the more convinced I become that we're dealing with something much bigger and more organized than just a few rogue amusement parks. The logistics alone would require serious resources and connections at multiple levels of government and industry. If you've had an experience like the ones I've shared today, please reach out to me. I'm building a database of these encounters, trying to map patterns and identify connections, because I have a feeling that these hidden theme parks are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to infrastructure that exists outside our normal reality. Thanks for watching, and remember, the next time you're driving through an area that seems a little too empty, a little too quiet, keep your eyes open. You never know what might be hiding just beyond that next hill.